Thankful that they were willing to come up and speak in front of you and give testimony to the importance of community as the church, which is what we talked about last week. But man, so much good that God is doing, and I'm not blowing hot air blowing smoke when I say it. That I really have looked forward to this all week, and I'm glad to be with you. Thankful for our band and singing some hymns, which we haven't done in a while, and grateful for Holy, Holy, Holy. I think is maybe my favorite hymn, just because of how much it gives God His nature. I mean, it just tells us about who He is, and a lot of times I think we get caught up in singing about who we are in front of God instead of singing about who God is all the time, regardless of who we are. And so I think songs like Holy, Holy, Holy do a good job of reframing and saying God is this all the time. And so I'm thankful for that. Thank you, Shannon and band, for all your hard work. There is a joy set before you that up until this point you have only known and felt glimmers of. A joy that will be found in a new world and ultimate peace. A joy that will echo through the attitudes and emotions of the millions around you who like you, no longer worry or strive, but instead rest in the goodness of their Creator. You'll no longer search for a meaning or crowns, but you'll gladly lay yourself and your purpose at the feet of your King. Death will be in the past, and only life and light will remain. It will be a joy beautiful on its own and amplified by the company of others. The community we will feel in our eternal joy will grow the joy of where we are. It will be a joy shared and even more given by Jesus, because He purchased this joy. He's the one that set it before you. He's the one who set it before Abraham and Isaac and Joseph and Moses, David and Samuel, and now He sets it before you. True, unfading, world-transforming joy. Because truly, Jesus is the joy. It's not only that He gives it, it's that He is the joy. It's not the things that He gives that is the joy set before you. It is Christ Himself. At Provision Church, our desire is for our members to be driven by the joy of the gospel. And we're in the middle of a series where we're talking about what is membership, that truly membership, real membership, meaningful membership of a church cannot be cheap, that it must come at a cost. And we're doing this by walking through our mission statement. And part of that mission statement is being driven by the joy of the gospel. We want to be driven in our actions and in our thoughts at home, work, at our hobbies, and really everywhere in between, to be driven by the good news of Jesus Christ. So our mission statement, just to review, is to be a Christ-centered community driven by the joy of the gospel to make disciples who make disciples. If you've got a note-taking guide, at the entrance over there's a round black table, and if you're not familiar, there's a handout right there, and on the back of it, it's blank. If you've picked up one of those, what I would love for you to do is just take a second and write down the mission statement. In education, we know that writing helps you remember things. You know, it's another way to remember. Some of you are auditory. There's different types of learners, but writing helps you know and learn things. So I really would love for each of you to commit this mission statement to memory. That we are on mission together as a church, and to talk about what our mission is, it helps to know what it is. So this is it, memory. So far we've been through a Christ-centered, we had a week where we talked about what it means to be Christ-centered. Community, we talked about that last week. And this week we're talking about driven by the joy of the gospel. So far we're a Christ-centered community driven by the joy of the gospel. But why does it matter what drives us? I believe the question of what drives us is the same question as why. So when I say what drives you, I'm really asking, why are you doing something? What's the purpose? Why? Why do we wake up early on a Sunday morning after a long week to come to a worship service with fellow believers? The same answer to that question will be the same answer as what drives you? What drove you to be here? Why are you here? As Christians, our why must always point back to Christ. Christ died to be the answer to your why. Christ rose again to be the answer to your why. But not just for why are you here on Sunday morning, but why all the time. To any thought, to any action, why? We must point back to Jesus. That's what he came for, is to be the purpose in our lives. But why are we driven by the joy of the gospel and not just the gospel? As we're writing this, why not driven by the gospel? Why driven by the joy of the gospel? Shouldn't the gospel be enough to drive us? Maybe. And I think the answer to that is yes. But similarly to how we said, make disciples who make disciples, that's a redundancy. Joy of the gospel should be in some ways redundant. The gospel is joy-bringing. It's one of the key truths of the gospel that when we truly understand and surrender to Christ, when the gospel is real for us, that there should be joy there. We've just given up the life of death and sin and bondage and come into life and everlasting peace. It's just a natural thing. But in our culture and context, where we are, there are many believers and people who call themselves believers that understand the gospel but seem to have no joy in it. They seem to live in melancholy and despondency and cheerlessness. I looked up those words as synonyms, but it's true. Like the gospel isn't all about Jesus. I mean, there are people around us who live as if the gospel isn't all about the source of all joy and the work he did to give us life, even when we couldn't deserve it. So we're okay with some redundancy because we understand the context God has us in. That there are many people who claim the gospel who have no joy in it. So we are Christians. We are a community of believers driven by the joy of the gospel. We're going to see today that even Jesus was and is driven by the joy of his gospel. If Jesus is, we should be too. We should have a life marked by joy. And we'll see if we understand the gospel, it'll influence the why and even the how of everything we do. So look with me. Today we're in Hebrews chapter 12. So if you've got your Bibles, turn there with me. Hebrews chapter 12. We're going to start in verse 1. Hebrews chapter 12. Here the writer says, God says, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely. And we're going to pause right here and just talk about context. So Hebrews 10, we're coming into Hebrews 12, looking at Hebrews 10 and 11. Hebrews 10 both encourages suffering Christians and reassures that faith is the only thing needed for salvation, by faith alone, and that no works are needed. So Hebrews 10 is encouraging suffering believers. Hebrews 11 builds on this line of thinking. If you come through Hebrews 11, you see that it's tracing the faith of men and women in the Old Testament and asserting that it's their faith that saved them, not their works. So Hebrews 12 starts by saying, because of this, because we have this evidence and example of so many that have come before us, we should have confidence. We can still practice this type of confidence building. We can look at the examples of guys like Adoniram Judson and really his first wife who died on mission, and his second wife who died on mission, and his third wife who died on mission, and 5 of his 8 children who died on mission for the Burmese people. And we can say, because of their example, have confidence. We can look at Jim Elliot, who gave his life for the Ecuadorian people. We can look at John Chow, who gave his life for the Sentinelese people. In recognizing the faith of those who came before us, and those are 3 of hundreds of thousands, by recognizing the faith of those who came before us, we can take courage and confidence. We should, and we shouldn't neglect to look at those who have come before us. Hebrews sets that example. And it's like the writer of Hebrews is using this as the launching pad for his next thought. With all this confidence, with that example, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely. Since we know this faith is true, since we know that this faith is of infinite worth, give up the idols that are so worthless. Give up the idols that are so worthless, yet so burdensome. He's saying, in the confidence of your faith, put away sin, the sin that seems to be reaching up and grabbing a hold of you. That sin that seems to want you so badly it clings to you. It holds on tightly. It's attached itself to you. It's like the mud on the bottom of your shoes that makes it hard to walk. It's like that small child that grabs onto your ankles and you drag. The sin that's clinging to you. It's like that porn addiction. It's like that toxic relationship. It's like that unwholesome talk. Sin clings to us. And I mentioned mud sticking to your shoe. The reason I think of that is because I was at the trip one time with the students, and Will Stevenson, I don't even know if he's in here, was walking, and we were at a corn maze, and so we're in this field, and the ground is it had just rained for like days. Y'all remember this past year when it rained like every day of the year, like torrential every day? Okay, so we were out there one of these days, and the mud was like a pit of mud. Everywhere you walked, you were going in it, and it was like, what's this? There's like a sound that mud makes when your foot goes into it. It's like, you know what I'm talking about? That's not it. That was a terrible try. I'm sorry. That wasn't it at all. But at one point, we're walking through it, and we've got bags over our shoes trying to protect it. At one point, Will steps, and he comes up, and his foot is there, but his shoe is still in the mud. And so, we were laughing so hard, but that mud was clinging to him. It was like it wanted his shoe. Every step, we were fighting to keep what we had. And isn't that true of our Christian life, that sin tries to reach up and take the joy that really the gospel has given us, that Christ has given us by coming and saving us, but we let this sin hold on. We walk through these mud pits where it's just reaching up, not wanting us to move forward in the way of Christ. Being driven by the joy of the gospel means that we lay aside every weight. As we look at what it means to be driven by the joy of the gospel, it means laying aside every weight. And that's really a metaphor for saying lay aside sin. We lay aside every weight and sin. That's what the writer says. But not for the same reason that a Buddhist monk might also strive for a moral life. What is our why for laying aside sin? Is it the same as someone who is, you look at them and there doesn't seem to be much sin in their life, but they're not a Christian? We lay them aside. Our why for why we reject sin is because of the joy before us. We lay them aside. We lay sin aside because Jesus is our joy. Not because we're seeking a joyless, ascetic life, but because we're seeking a joyful and fulfilling life. We lay them aside not because we're trying to live with less, but because we're trying to live with more. Don't you want more? Don't you want Christ? Don't you want joy? These are the things that we desire, and it's the things that the writer of Hebrews, the things that God is telling us here, lay aside every weight, lay aside sin for joy. So lay every weight aside and be driven by the joy of the gospel, because the gospel is that Jesus came to set you free from that weight. The truth is that nothing else can remove the weight of sin. Other things might come along and cling differently. They might promise to clean your shoes for a little while, but then they stay on your shoes. Right? Other things might come along making promises, but the promises of idols are empty. Only Jesus, living a life you couldn't live, dying a death you deserved, and rising again from the grave, can truly set you free in a way that you can lay aside every weight. And that right there is the gospel. That's the gospel, that Jesus came for sinners. Matthew 11, verses 28 and 30 through 30 say, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." I think I reference this verse as much as any verse, because when you look at our culture, what is more hope-giving than "my burden is light"? Don't you feel it in yourself, the burden of our world? And if you do you not feel like those who don't know Christ are being crushed beneath the weight of the world around them, the sin that they are trying to keep up with? I think Matthew 11, verses 28 through 30 is a wonderful gospel presentation. Come to me, come to Christ, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Lay aside every weight. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. So he's saying, lay aside every weight. And he's not saying it for nothing. The verse doesn't stop there. The sentence doesn't stop there. He continues. Why are we laying aside this weight? Why is Paul telling us to lay aside this weight? Because we're running a race. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. Being driven by the joy of the gospel means running with endurance. So what does it mean to be driven by the joy of the gospel? It means to understand where you are. It means to remember that there's a finish line. It means to live life hard because you're running a race. The Bible teaches us a lot by giving us metaphorical pictures of reality. Run with endurance. Gird your loins and run with endurance. When we think of the Christian life as a marathon, a race that is set before us that requires endurance, it adds even better perspective on the need to lay aside weights. The truth is, you don't see too many big men running marathons. You got too much weight they haven't laid aside to run a race with any effectiveness. But it's one thing for me to not be able to run the Boston Marathon, right? We recognize, because of some extra body weight. It's another thing entirely for us not to be able to live a life that honors Christ because of the sin that we carry with us. Paul says this exact thing in 1 Corinthians 9. It's like he knew that God's word should all go together. It's like God was inspiring all of this. 1 Corinthians 9, verse 24 says, "Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize." Check out verse 25. "Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last." That Boston Marathon medal, someday it won't exist. They do it to get a crown that won't last. But we do it. Why? But we do it. We run the race with endurance to get a crown that will last forever. We do it to get a crown that will last forever. The joy of the gospel motivates us to kill the sin in our lives so that we can live a life with eternal value. We kill sin for the sake of joy. We lay aside the weight because this race can be a wonderful journey. This race doesn't have to be like the Krispy Kreme run in Raleigh, where you're throwing up the whole way because you just ate a dozen donuts, right? Doesn't have to be that way. This race can be a well-prepared, wonderful journey. I mean, I've never been a great runner. I ran a 650 mile one time. It's like the pride and joy of my life. But some of you know the feeling of accomplishment and triumph of completing 5Ks and marathons. The training to run those races can be grueling. I mean, you can have early mornings when you could be sleeping in your warm, soft bed. There might be some chafing along the way because you're running long distances. It's not fun. You might have some even greater injuries. You're hurting your legs or your feet. It can be grueling, but it's worth it for the goal. It's worth it for the finish line. Here's the thing, guys and ladies. Here's the thing, men and women. Here's the thing. You don't have a choice. There's not a sign up for this 5K. You're in it. You're running it right now. Here's the perspective that sin is trying to take away from you by clinging so closely to you, that you are in your race right now. Some of you are further, some of you are closer to that finish line, but you are running whether you like it or not. It's the truth. Life is a race. You're either going to run it with the weight of sin, or you're going to run it with the joy of Christ. The writer of Hebrews says, run to win. Run with endurance. If you're being held down and back by your sin, you won't run well. Do this right. Have some fun. Enjoy this. Lay aside the weight and run the race with endurance. Even 1 Corinthians 9 reminds us that we are running for a crown that will last forever. Run in such a way to get the prize. Well, let's look back at Hebrews 12. Start with me. We're just going to read these two verses all the way through. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him. Let's just do that again, verse 2 again, because it's so good. Looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. If we are going to be driven by the joy of the gospel, we have to look to Jesus. What does it mean to be driven by the joy of the gospel? It means looking to Jesus. It means keeping our eyes on Christ, who is our joy. We look at him because he founded our faith. Without him, we have nothing to have faith in. Even the prophets of old, from chapter 11, lived with the faith of a Savior to come. Their faith was in a coming Jesus. Their faith was thousands of years before his birth. It was already based on the foundation of Jesus Christ, who was and is to come. The confidence in our faith that chapter 11 grounds us in starts and ends in Jesus Christ, because not only did he found it, he perfected it. Being certain of what you hope for and sure of what you do not see is worthwhile. Your faith is worthwhile. Your faith is consequential because Jesus perfected it. Not because your faith is good, not because you're doing anything worthwhile, but because Jesus has already perfected it. Jesus perfected the faith that you need. Your faith has a glory that's been sealed by the tomb that no longer is. Your faith is not sealed by your efforts. It's sealed by Jesus' efforts. Jesus perfected your faith. There are people walking around with faith in things that have not been perfected. The faith you have in your bank account has not been perfected. The faith you have in your spouse has not been perfected. The faith you have in your morality has not been perfected. The faith you have in your church has not been perfected. The faith you have in yourself has not been perfected. Those things will let you down, and they will let you down, and they will let you down, and they will hurt you. But the faith in Jesus Christ, who has founded it and perfected it, will not. Only a faith in Jesus Christ has been perfected. It's been perfected by his own blood and his own resurrection. And what would drive Jesus to a bloody death? What would drive him to a gruesome death on a cross to save hearts and minds that hated him? Not that were just unaware of him, hearts and minds that hated him. What would drive him to step down from glory? What made him take on the sin of all humanity for all time? What made him willing to suffer and to endure the cross and to despise the shame? What was his why? What drove Jesus? Hebrews 12:2 says that it was the joy set before him. Jesus was driven by the joy of the gospel. He was driven by the perfect joy in himself. It was because of the joy set before him that he did what he did. The joy of seeing the dead brought to life, the joy of pleasing the Father, the joy of being restored to his place of glory at the Father's right hand, the joy of your heart's total affection being directed towards him. Check it out, the joy of your joy. Isn't that a cool thing to think about? That what drove Jesus, at least in part, was his joy in your joy. Band, y'all can go ahead and come up. I love to say that love is enjoying someone else's joy. When you think about love and how we treat others, enjoying someone else's joy, even when it comes at your expense, is a necessary part of love. If I love you, I'm going to enjoy your joy, even if it isn't the most fun thing for me. Jesus gave his life because he loves you. That's simple, right? This is going back to kindergarten. This is going back to 3-year-olds singing Jesus Loves Me. Jesus gave his life because he loves you. But what's not simple is the question, do you need to be loved? Right? Are we looking for love in places other than Christ? And what would it mean to you to have the love of Christ in your life? Let me tell you this, Jesus loves you. He enjoys your joy. Jesus enjoys your joy. And he knows that your greatest joy, the greatest possible joy you could ever have, right now or ever, forever, will always be him. Everything else, like we've said, will let you down. Everything else will prove that it only truly loves itself. Every idol only loves itself. Money doesn't love you. Except Jesus. He truly loves you. He enjoys your joy. So let's be driven by that same joy. Whatever we do, Provision Church, whatever we do, let's be driven by the joy of the gospel. Because looking to Jesus, he was driven by the joy of the gospel. So this morning, if you recognize that you're living a life not driven by the joy of the gospel, and you want to have a life driven by that good, eternal joy, I'd love to talk to you. I'll be over there. You can talk to me while we sing. You can wait till afterwards and talk. You can grab someone next to you and talk. But if the Holy Spirit is working in your mind, if you feel that movement inside of you and you think, this isn't me, talk to somebody about that. talk. We're in a community together. And maybe you haven't been a part of this community except for today. We want to be community with you. Have that conversation. Let me pray for you. Father, we praise you for the cloud of witnesses. That we do get to look back and have confidence looking forward, looking towards you. God, for whatever reason, you have given us each a place in this race. God, give us that perspective, but help us to not run a race full of melancholy and cheerlessness. God, help us to run a race full of joy because we see the beauty of the crown that lasts forever, because we see you, because we see your wonder and your love, because it's not just something that we have in our head, but it's something that we can feel and know, God, that you are the best thing. You are the greatest joy. Thank you for enjoying our joy. Thank you for not neglecting us. Thank you for coming for us. We love you. Praise in your name. Amen.